I'm going on mute now.
Hello everyone and welcome to another week of Trad Tasman Talk. I'm Tim Wilms here in Melbourne where it is 6 p.m. on May the 1st, 2020. Happy May Day everyone.
Happy May Day, Tim. It is 8 p.m. here in Auckland and we are streaming live on the Right Minds channel as well as the Unshackled channel. I see that everyone is streaming in. Tuning in to the show, and we are ready to go and talk about the latest news the latest developments of the past week.
Yeah, well, we'll start over in New Zealand because you went from level 3 to from level 4 to level 3 lockdown, which basically meant that everyone could get McDonald's and KFC.
That was exactly the biggest difference here. The McDonald's, KFC, Burger King, not Burger King because they're bust, but all of the other ones had their drive-thrus filled up, and queues. We're talking hours and hours of queues. People lined up at 5 a.m. in the morning to enjoy their wonderful allowance, the permission of the government to go and get takeaway, and they. Absolute chaos in many places. The burger fuel, I believe somewhere in Auckland, had massive queues outside of it because you're allowed to do click and collect, and they didn't really obey the social distancing rules.
We've got a photo here. Yeah, the burger fuel. We don't have that in Australia. Just give us an overview of what we're missing.
Basically, the most expensive gourmet burgers that you can buy. They're like $30. Apparently, Tim, you're too loud. I may try and turn myself my audio up if I can. Thank you, chat. Expensive burgers starting at $20, $30. Sorry.
Yeah, I've just turned you up here on my end as well.
Excellent. Oh, that's good. Can you guys? I'll before I continue the chat. Let me know. Am I better? Are we at a better volume now?
I assume that's the Right Minds YouTube live chat, because again we're streaming live to both the Unshackled and Right Minds YouTube channel. It turns out that our streaming software will only let 2 streams run simultaneously, so no D live tonight, but certainly we're on our respective YouTube channels, and of course the Unshackled YouTube channel is monetized. So that means that you can send through a super chat directly through YouTube by pressing in the live chat the dollar button, typing in the amount and what you'd like to say to us, and yeah, we'll be happy to read it out here.
Yes, thank you everyone for your contributions to the show, especially Tim absolutely appreciates that. So the back to burger fuel. To me the burgers are really overpriced. But they're really good. Had it once or twice. But basically the most expensive sort of takeaway burgers you can get. Restaurant prices. And the social distancing had a little bit of trouble there. I was out because I didn't get some takeaway straight away. Tried to wait a couple of nights for it to be less busy, but that hasn't really happened yet, unless tonight or yesterday. Not going to go and check it. Not going to go and check the queues every night. But I noticed.
Hey, you're a reporter. Well. Like you've got to go down and.
I got a license. Have a license to practice journalism.
So some live blogging.
Yeah, I could try that. But I didn't. I don't like the snitching aspect, and I wouldn't want to accidentally catch somebody not social distancing on camera. So.
Yeah. Apparently, I'm still too loud.
So I'm sorry, guys. Tim sounds great to me.
I've turned you up on my end as well. So,
okay, cool.
Uh, when they stop complaining, that's when we know that the sound is right.
And balance will have been achieved. The level 3 snitch line. So we've got a new snitch line for level 3. It got over 1,000 complaints in 48 hours of people not social distancing properly. So the snitch culture is alive and well. But in addition to takeaway, there have been some relaxation around travel. So and work as well. So if it's safe, the key for work is if it's safe, if you can social distance, etc., you could go back to work. They're still encouraging everyone to work from home if they can. You're allowed to travel within your region for recreation and other activities. So I could go for maybe an hour. I mean, an hour drive might be a bit much. I could probably still be in Auckland with about an hour drive. So that's the kind of recommendations there. And as long as you're going to do something legitimate like work or recreation, still social gatherings, social events are not allowed. You can have a slightly bigger bubble. So people have been, I wouldn't say encouraged, but definitely there's no complaints if you bring your extended family, etc., into your little bubble. So you can travel between several houses as long as you sort of keep it exclusive and stick with each other and minimize the contact you have with outsiders. So sticking with our hyper xenophobia, just your family.
I think I figured out what the problem is here. I'm on the wrong microphone. Here we go. Here.
People say you sound good now, so a little bit of an echo, but otherwise okay.
How's that now?
Sounds well. We'll carry on and we'll see what they say. So, what's it been like in Australia, Tim? Have you had because I believe in many cases our restrictions are still tighter than some of the states, but I know that you're in the worst place to be.
Because we are a federation here in Australia, where even though we do have a lot of people have talked about how the federal government has been increasing in its power, but the national cabinet, which has all the state and territory premiers as well as the prime minister in it, the way it's worked so far since the lockdown began is the chief medical and chief health officers, they basically say this is what you need to do to contain the virus. The Prime Minister announces at a press conference with the Chief Medical Officer of Australia, Professor Brendan Murphy, and then the state and territory leaders enforce it. But what we've seen now is basically the national cabinet consensus breakdown, and the more control freak totalitarian state leaders are keeping their states locked down for longer. And of course, the personification of that is our Victorian Premier of it's now called the People's Democratic Republic of Dan Andrews, Stan. We are still under house arrest until at least May 11th here, when the second state of emergency decree expires. And that's when he says he might. He'll revisit. He hasn't promised anything, but Mother's Day is on May the 10th, and so he effectively Mother's Day is cancelled because visiting your family is not considered essential travel. So we can still be pulled over by the Victoria Police, and if they don't believe us to have a reasonable excuse to leave the house, they can still issue us with $1,600 fines. But the other
visiting your mother is totally a non-essential activity.
Well, you might kill her.
Oh yes.
Even though looking at the current cases now, we have round about 1,000 active cases in Australia, 92 deaths, and there's only been 16 new cases confirmed since yesterday. It's all the daily infections now, they've all been below 20. in Australia.
Ours are sort of consistently floating at about 3 a day. We have nobody in ICU at the moment, unless that changed today. I didn't bother to check. And 5 or 6 in hospital was the last count. Yeah.
Senator Slayer has sent through a super chat on the Unshackled live chat for $5.99. Thank you, Senator Slayer. Though he hasn't included anything for me to read out, which is highly unusual for him. He normally wants me to
misclick. If you send it through, we'll still read it out.
Yeah.
I've been asked as well. I can read it out instead. Is why does that guy look like PewDiePie? I think he's talking about me rather than you, Tim, and that's because all Europeans look the same. So that's just the way it is, I'm afraid.
You're Dutch of Dutch heritage.
Yes.
PewDiePie is Swedish.
Swedish. Yeah, I may have a little bit of Swedish in me too. You never know. The those Vikings. Anybody who lived on the European coastline wasn't safe from the Vikings.
So May Day today in New South Wales, you're allowed to have 2 friends over for social visits, so you can have a mini party.
Lovely.
And from tomorrow in Queensland, you can engage in more recreational activities such as picnicking, motorbiking, fishing, mountain bike riding.
Sounds very generous.
Yeah, and well, New South Wales, that has Liberal Premier in Gladys Berejiklian. Queensland has a Labor Premier in Anastasia Palaszczuk. She still won't send children back to school. Most people suspect that is because, like Daniel Andrews here in Victoria, who's declared the whole of Term 2 to be at not non-school attendance, so learning from home, Anastasia Palaszczuk, there was a leaked audio recording where she was speaking at a Labor branch meeting, and she said that the reason she didn't want to send kids back to school is, well, she feared that if one of them got sick, she'd be blamed for it. Which is, I suppose,
we've had some schools, preschools have been allowed to open, but many of them haven't. Partly people are afraid to go back, and the other part is the amount of paperwork that the staff have to do is so insanely high that many have simply opted not to open. But we've got our own preschool, just a local church one down the road, and so the percentage of students that have gone back is about less than 25, so 20, yeah. About 20%, and that seems to be fairly consistent, perhaps even less. And there are of course limits as well on they're only supposed to have like 10 children in the classroom and so on. So it's likely we will have months of distance learning in New Zealand as well.
And the Northern Territory, they have released a timeline for them to reopen everything in their state and the economy. I'll bring up the graphic here, the NT recovery timeline to the new normal. So, well, beginning from May 1, today, playgrounds, pools and parks, outdoor religious gatherings. So you can go to church as long as it's an outdoor church. Same with weddings and funerals. So you can have a garden wedding.
Well, when is that?
Today. That's today.
Oh, that's today.
Yeah.
Okay.
Fishing with a mate. Outdoor non-contact sports such as golf and tennis, public skate parks, outdoor gym equipment, open house inspections and auctions. Then from May 15th, in 2 weeks' time, activities with a 2-hour limit, restaurants, cafes, clubs and bars, so you can only stay there for 2 hours. Beauty parlors, facial services to begin the 5th of June, gyms, yogas and Pilates, massage, indoor religious gatherings, including weddings and funerals. So you can only have a sermon that goes for 2 hours. Outdoor sports such as footy and netball, public libraries, toy libraries, galleries and museums. Then 5th of June, that is Total Liberation Day, except all businesses must have COVID plans. And of course, the social distancing and strict hygiene protocols still apply. All sports and competitions, casinos, TABs and pokies, bars and nightclubs, tattoo parlors, adult entertainment, laser and cosmetic surgeries and cinemas. And so all the NTers, they're all stoked because they've had no cases of community transmission. They've also had their borders completely sealed, mainly to protect the Indigenous people of the territory because they have poorer health outcomes. But the Chief Minister of the Northern Territory, also Labor Michael Gunner, is confident enough that he can set everyone free, though he has had to cancel Cracker Night in the territory this year, which is a sacred occasion for Territorians. He said that the reason he cancelled, not because of the lockdown, but because the lockdown has meant that they can't source all of the materials to make the crackers.
Well, that's. I was just looking at that chart, thinking, if you took that graphic back in time, like 3 months, and showed it to somebody, you would have been laughed at. So, was there a limit on outdoor gatherings and things that wasn't on the chart, or is this sort of
only social distancing? The 1.5.
So okay, no limits as long as you're doing social distancing. Okay, cool. Oh well, very nice, very interesting. We do have Mother's Day, etc. Can still be celebrated in New Zealand this week because with extended bubbles, people who at least live nearby their families, who don't have to travel too far, should have no trouble extending their bubbles, going to see their parents and grandparents and so on. That should all be without harassment. The South Island as the only notable place here in New Zealand. It's not really an independent state, although some of them would like to be independent. They have had no coronavirus cases or no new cases in 5 days. I believe they're down to just a couple of dozen active cases, if that. So it's a very real possibility that if we get around to next week's show, the South Island in New Zealand may be declared entirely COVID-1984 free, and could it's been said there won't be any regional changes in restrictions, but it's possible that might change, depending on how some of the regions do in New Zealand. We'll have another review of the level 2 restrictions in, say, another 2 weeks. Well, a little bit less than that. So it'll be on the 11th that we'll have another review. The reason why we're probably still keeping restrictions in place, apparently, is the contact tracing system is not complete. So you mentioned earlier on that you had various requirements, federal requirements.
11 of the 15 requirements for social restrictions to be lifted. That was announced by Scott Morrison at the conclusion of today's National Cabinet meeting. And so this will be decided at next Friday's National Cabinet meeting. So whenever Scott Morrison now appears with the Chief Medical Officer, Professor Brendan Murphy, it reminds me of when they'd announced the results of a leadership spill, or sort of when they announced the results of the marriage survey, the ABS. It's sort of like, we're all on the edge of our seats. So we're going to but this time it's like, are we going to be able to be free? That's what it is.
Crazy time, yeah. In New Zealand, we do have several requirements. They've listed them. I don't know what they are because they're not that important, because the government won't actually tell us which ones have been met, so or how many of them. So we're left assuming that at least one of them hasn't been met, and they just won't tell us what it is because it's their fault. So.
Well, Scott Morrison said that one of the other 4 requirements that hasn't been fulfilled is enough Australians downloading the COVID Safe app. 3 million Australians have downloaded the COVID Safe app, which launched last Sunday night. I don't think I've explained to you exactly how it works, but it's through Bluetooth. So whenever you come... people who've downloaded the app, when you come into close contact with somebody, there's a digital handshake with the Bluetooth. We're told that the data is stored on your phone, and you can delete the app at any time. And you don't even have to give your name and address. You can have use a pseudonym. So, for example, you can choose Big Dick 69er if you so choose. So, just name, phone number, postcode, and age range. Doesn't ask for your gender either.
Wow, we've gone from 2 genders to no genders. That was quick.
Well, we don't have genders listed on our driver's licenses now, or key passes. What about New Zealand driver's license? They have genders on them?
No, I don't believe so. Not going entirely from memory here. We still have no real news about any kind of app here in New Zealand. My main concern is anything that's especially if it's made by the government and it doesn't have its source code open, it isn't open source, then I'm not very inclined to trust it. Besides, Google already knows where I am, so if they want to know where I am, they just need to ask Google. And I'm not really interested in installing cheap spyware they may have bought at a discount from Beijing.
Another plane I heard just fly over there. Is that coming or going?
Forgot to hit mute in time to let people be under the illusion that somehow air travel has been cancelled.
You're basically in the. Well, you can do a bit of snitching yourself if you notice the government. Hey, what are these planes doing here?
Yeah, exactly. So that's all continued. Yeah. I actually noticed on the first day of level 3 earlier this week that there was a lot of activity going on that should not have been within the in my area, that should not have really been fine under level 3, but it's like I said before, I'm not on board with the snitching, and I'm more in favor of letting people take responsibility for themselves rather than try and have the police enforce some kind of regulations, these rules and regulations that are the government hasn't even released their own Crown law advice on. So it's all a little bit. It mostly is the case of people voluntarily complying. Really, there's no real heavy enforcement mechanisms available, and we've got that in New Zealand. In the we've really seen 2 cases of this, especially one are what are called community checkpoints, most of which are run by local iwi out in the regions. These are tribes. They've basically set up their own checkpoints along main roads where they will stop cars and do similar checkpoints like the police would run and ask people what they're doing and where they're going. And their idea is to try and stop people from traveling into the areas. Some of them got into the news because they scared a couple of old people who were worried that these heavily tattooed gang members were going to ask them where they lived, things like that. Where do you live? Where are you going? You'd be a little bit worried if somebody asks you that.
They're cultural gangs.
Cultural thing, yeah. But anyway, the police said no, there's no gangs involved. There's no gang involvement here. Nothing to worry about. And they finally announced, the police commissioner finally announced that reason they didn't shut down these illegal checkpoints is because if they did shut them down, that there would have been protests. I use the word protests in quotes here because I think perhaps riots or civil war or something is rather what they were after, and the police didn't want any trouble from the local tribes, didn't want them to get a little bit twitchy, and so they let them go about they let them do their thing, and then we had released that from David Farrer from Kiwi Blog. He basically said that the leader of the mongrel mob, who was a convicted killer, tortured a man to death, spent only 6 years in jail for it, and it was deemed an essential worker, that the police didn't break up meetings at his house because apparently he was an essential worker. The police denied that they designated him an essential worker, but it was revealed that the gang itself, the mongrel mob, had been involved in delivering food parcels to the needy during this difficult time. Nothing to do with drugs, of course, specifically food parcels to the needy and helping out. So the gang's doing really good community work here, making sure that everybody's keeping safe and fed. And the gang leader himself had weekly phone calls with the deputy police commissioner to make sure that everything's okay. So you've got your little state of
Dan Andrews Stan, which
Stan.
is
Yep.
it has
But we're
been coined.
We're the ganglands of New Zealand now. So
that term, I should give credit to, it has been coined by Gideon Rosner of the Institute of Public Affairs. He's probably becoming the most prominent, I would say, freedom fighter for Victorians. He's a self-described hedonist. He loves to party and have a night out. So I hope that he does basically we've seen the protests over in the United States, but just hold as Stewie calls it in Family Guy, a sexy party, and see if the police come to break it up. It actually reminds me of when was it Rex Tanner goes to Moe's pet shop during Prohibition, and they have to turn the tavern into a pet shop. They have to hide that they're having a good time. That's basically Victoria at the moment.
So there is it's basically but basically a given that there's a lot of partying going on behind the scenes, a lot of breaches going on behind the scenes.
Or I have no knowledge of that.
But I mean, it's accepted, or sort of the rumors, or is there actually any definitive data out there in the public about that, or?
Well, just we know probably by the fines that have been given out there, the people have been caught having parties, and I interviewed on my Wilms Front program Wednesday night MMA fighter Nick Banjo Patterson, who's been operating his MMA training clinic throughout the lockdown. The Victoria Police have had 2 unsuccessful attempts to enter the premise after they received a tip-off that there was a mass gathering there, and the second time they brought some old bureaucrat from the Department of Health and Human Services, and he's one of those know your rights people, stand your ground, assert your rights, and so they just got bamboozled by him, and so they haven't bothered him since.
Yeah, that's good. We've seen some. Yeah, there haven't been any high profile attempts here in New Zealand. But like I've been saying on the show all along, there is the know your rights crowd would do very well here in New Zealand too. If they attempted it professionally anyway. It sounds like he knows what he's doing. I've seen it. You always. I do love watching those videos, and sometimes these guys find the wrong cop, and it. Or at least their arguments are not sound enough. But that's quite interesting. That's good. We had a super chat.
Yes.
Before we continue,
from Origin Adamandus.
Yeah, Adamantius.
Question for Tim: are you a fan of Percy Granger? He was very based. I haven't heard of him, to be completely honest. So I might look him up after the show. I say now look him up. I don't say Google him, because that'll probably just spit out a whole bunch of fake news or fake history or whatever. Yeah.
I did it for you. It said he was an Australian-born composer, and I'm not sure about the rest of it, but that's so there you go.
Yeah, here are some quotes from Daniel Andrews. We have to be patient and really clear about the fact that we are all in this together, and we have to stay the course. I am bloody sick of hearing that. I hate hearing that song now, We're All in This Together, and celebrities singing it. And, over the next couple of weeks, we will move to the 11th of May, where we have to renew the state of emergency. So he hasn't said it's going to end. We'll have to work really hard in these days, because he's promised a testing blitz. And I'd ask Victorians to keep following the rules, keep staying at home. Basically means comply with the house arrest, otherwise we'll fine you. And this gives you an indication of the people behind Daniel Andrews, that because it was Captain Cook Day on Wednesday.
Yes.
He's landing at Botany Bay. Significant day in Australia's history. I'm not sure if New Zealanders hold it with, given that he did land, Botany Bay in Australia.
He did come to New Zealand not long after, so we do have a Captain Cook Day here as well. It gets the usual the usual triggered. What do you say? We're trying to avoid the banned words here that we've avoided for 2 shows at least. But we do have some people who really hate Captain Cook, and partially because on his first arrival here, several Maori were shot and killed. But that was a highly regrettable incident for Captain Cook, and it was sort of. I think the particular tribe thought they were being attacked.
Is that actually like 100% historically confirmed, or is it disputed?
Yeah, well, it's confirmed, but the number of deaths is disputed. So between 2 and 6. So,
okay.
But nobody disputes that anybody died. Captain Cook and himself wrote in his journals that he was pretty sure some people died because they shot them. But yeah, they thought they were under attack, and they probably were, because the tribesmen were doing a haka, a war dance, and usually that means you're about to get your head chopped off. So it's not really. It's a historical incident that doesn't really have a guilty party, these days. So yeah. I'm seeing rabble rousers, snowflakes. Yeah, those are acceptable words. Thank you. I hadn't. God, need more descriptive words for when we're talking about the rabble rousers.
Yeah. So this is Victoria's Deputy Chief Health Officer. So in charge of making important health decisions, Dr. Annelies van Diemen. I know that she has said, well, it's an historically significant surname, but it also says die men. Sudden arrival of an invader from another land, decimating populations, creating terror, forces the population to make enormous sacrifices and completely change how they live in order to survive. COVID-19 or Cook 1770. So the Liberal state opposition have called for her to resign. Both Scott Morrison and Home Affairs Minister Peter Dutton have blasted her. Scott Morrison told her to stick to her day job. She's not a historian. Clearly by what she said. The Andrews government is standing by her. The health minister, Jenny Mikovits, just said that, no, it's the typical angry people, while Daniel Andrews just said, it was her designated day off on her private Twitter account.
Very good. Very good. Yes. So
and also what's come to light is that in a ABC Radio Melbourne interview, she talked about Dr. Van Diemen, how that this lockdown was help reducing other infections as well, and that's why it was good to extend it, which is what we've been talking about. If you lock everyone up,
exactly, it's safe. Stay home. You never leave your house. Stay in your bed. Don't walk down the stairs either. And we had the same case in New Zealand. Apparently, normal flu cases are down about 50%.
80%
not
in
bad.
Victoria.
Oh, very good. But 50%. So it only costs about $13 billion to reduce flu cases by 50%. So that's that's a really good trade-off. That's a couple of billion here, a couple of billion there. You could end up saving a few dozen more people.
Well, in Queensland, the annual flu vaccination rate is down, even though with all the extra hygiene, hand sanitizer is now in abundance. You can now at the supermarket buy 4 bottles of hand sanitizer. That is the new limit now, because basically every distillery is now producing hand sanitizer. But it was concerning for the Queensland Premier that that state's vaccination rates were down. So Anastasia Palaszczuk did a flu shot herself from the cameras, and there's been a lot of questioning whether she actually had the flu vaccination because the 7 News camera panned away right at the moment where it is alleged to have pierced her skin, and it was just like in, out, and she's like, "Oh, is that it?" Over before it even began. And then they reenacted it for the cameras where the cap was on. And so that, of course, well, it just shows you how cynical that people are at this stage.
Yeah, I can believe that. We had another super chat while this was going on from Gareth Jones.
New Zealand,
$8.90. Yeah, New Zealand, $8.90. and the message is just 10. I'm not sure what the significance of that is. If you do have a real message, please do post it, and we can read that out afterwards. And
Maybe
there was a follow-up, by the way,
Day.
on your other a Mother's Day message. There was another follow-up on your other super chat, which somebody mentioned you must go to the Percy Granger Museum in Melbourne. So apparently he's got his own museum that you could go and visit.
Would that be an essential activity or reasonable excuse to be out of the house?
Somehow I doubt it.
Yeah, these are the things we've got to weigh up here.
I forgot.
Just going back to the coronavirus tracing app. So it's all stored on your phone, and if a person tests positive to the coronavirus, they have to consent to their digital handshakes being released, and then you'll be alerted you've been into contact with somebody with COVID-19. And apparently they're going to legislate, the federal government, 5 years in prison terms for accessing the data illegally, but they won't release the source code for security reasons. So that's got a lot of tech heads quite rightfully suspicious. And I know that you work in IT.
Yeah.
So you know, well, that gives you cause for concern.
Yes, stuff like this is always suspicious, and like I said, especially when the government is involved, they tend to be they somehow seem to tend to develop worse security issues than private companies. So you know, it's suspicious, and like I said, Google already knows where you are anyway. So just ask Google nicely, and maybe sorted.
I should have mentioned that our other mainland states, South Australia and Western Australia, you can have 10 people at your home for a social gathering there. They're on the road to the new normal as well. And, well, WA, they've de facto seceded from Australia. That's why they've been able to contain the virus. And it the premier of Western Australia, Mark McGowan, who's Labor, he's got a 89% approval rating, and he's up for election in a year. And he got profane heckles of praise when he was in the town of Rockington. Some guy yelled out, "Hey, we fucking love you," and the Auslan translator behind him translated the profanity on TV.
In New Zealand's polling numbers, where we have some leaked polls, no official polls. Apparently, the National Party has not been releasing its internal polling to even its own MPs, and so we've had a Labour Party leaked poll that shows that Labour is at 55%, National is at a low of 29%, which is the lowest poll number they very possibly would get in a decade, if one of the public polling companies reflects this, because this is, of course, internal polling for the Labour Party, which perhaps may favour the Labour Party more. And they've got their coalition partners, New Zealand First at 6%, the Greens at 5%, or I think the other way around, perhaps. Either way, just above the threshold. And but none of that even matters, because if they do clock in above 50% of the vote, then they govern alone. So that's basically where it's at. Jacinda's approval rating is at 65%, I believe. Just going to open this up so I can.
Daniel Andrews, he's at a 75% approval rating, so that's why he's got this is why I call it the People's Democratic Republic, because they did re-elect him in a landslide in 2018, and well, they're loving him locking them up, and so of course he's not going to give up this absolute power. Though we have had 3 days of bucketing rain these past 2 days in Victoria, so well, I for one have been in self-imposed lockdown because I don't want to go outside and get soaking wet.
I have been able to get this number. So it's the preferred prime minister ranking. She's at 65%. I think her approval rating is much higher, because obviously people who wouldn't necessarily vote for you would give you a higher approval. So either way, it's looking very nice for Jacinda, assuming she can hold an election in September. She may even want to get it earlier if she can, but it's still 5 or so months to go. As long as she keeps following the popularity. She's got all of the media writing wonderful things about her. She's given them $50 million. Supposedly the criticism, if they criticize her, her office actually asks journalists to correct the criticism. So things are going very, very nicely, very well.
That sounds like a tactic that the Chinese do when they get quite triggered when a media outlet it upsets them.
Absolutely. In fact, that was Scott Morrison, or at least somebody in his cabinet, who triggered China this week.
Oh well, it all happened last Friday when they didn't like Peter Dutton echoing the Morrison government's call for an independent international investigation into the origins of the coronavirus, and they've ratcheted up the threats as their triggering has intensified. Their ambassador to Australia has threatened to cut off trade with Australia.
It's not a bad thing at this point.
But we now actually have a bipartisan. It's bipartisan now. This push for an independent inquiry, and even Labor's Shadow Foreign Affairs spokeswoman Penny Wong has said we need to rethink our relationship with China, because both parties are aware that there is even more intense anger at China from ordinary Australians, and they have already wrecked our economies with this by giving birth to the virus. So what worse can they do? But another reason why politicians have been hesitant to take a harder line against China's strong arming and threats is because business leaders they like all the financial benefits from selling their things to China, and it was quite extraordinary. One of our mining magnates, Andrew Twiggy Forrest, he appeared at a press conference with the Health Minister, Greg Hunt, on Wednesday to announce that he'd secured 10 million testing kits from China. We've got to check if they work first. That's the thing. But he invited, unknown to the Health Minister, the Chinese Consular General of Victoria to just basically bomb this conference. And which a lot of people have considered an act of treason, and he's been labelled a traitor, and it's been dug up now that he actually publicly questioned whether the coronavirus was born in China. The Chinese, remember, they blamed the US. Now they've even
that's
suggested,
right. I said an American soldier.
Now they've even said it might be an Australian-born virus. They're now starting to blame us now. And Kerry Stokes, who also has mining interests and also owns the West Australian newspaper and the Seven Network, has said that Morrison government needs to cool it, and we should respect the China's wet market. So respect the bat soup bigots.
Eat the bats. Eat bats. The only activity we've had on this front in New Zealand has come from the Foreign Minister, Winston Peters, who's basically said that China has promised to leave us alone, even though we'll be collaborating with Australia on your inquiry. So we know exactly how that conversation went behind the scenes. It was the it was the old please let us please let us publicly do this thing, but behind the scenes we're still friends, and China will still take your money, right? Because and Winston Peters probably doesn't take much if any, money from China. We know the Labour Party gets a few donations. We know that the National Party gets very massive donations from the Communist Party of China, connected businessmen and so on. And yeah, the fact that the foreign minister has basically said, "Oh yeah, China will not punish us for this," means that they had to go and ask, and behind the scenes some sinister stuff would have gone on. They're like, yes, my little pet, you can go.
That is so nice of the Chinese to be understanding. Yeah, we understand you've got this Five Eyes Anzac alliance, and they don't often show mercy. I mean, that's incredible restraint on China's part. You are incredibly blessed.
We are very blessed, hashtag blessed. And this has absolutely nothing to do with the fact that several high-profile intelligence agents in the United States, for instance, have highlighted New Zealand as a weak point in the Five Eyes, where they suspect that the Communist Party gets a lot of infiltration and information through the Five Eyes network via New Zealand. So this may have absolutely nothing to do with a kind of long-term benefit for China at all.
Well, I've talked about how the New Zealand being part of the Five Eyes, China has stabbed the eye of New Zealand, and they're also doing severe eyeball damage in Australia, right? Well, I mentioned the People's Democratic Republic of Dan Andrews Stan. He signed up to the China's Belt and Road Initiative, and I mentioned those Western Australian businessmen. That attitude was echoed by the WA Premier, who I mentioned before, Mark McGowan. He said in an interview, it's in our interest to continue to have good trading with China. So they've de facto seceded from the rest of Australia, but it's looked like they're de facto becoming an extension, a province of the People's Republic of China.
Yes. It's amazing. It's amazing how quickly how quickly things are forgotten, or in this case, just blatantly ignored, because there's something in it for these people. Thankfully, I mean, there have been some calls here in New Zealand to say that we need to seriously take a look at divesting our exports and so on from mainland China. We should be looking at closer ties with Taiwan and Korea, Japan, Southeast Asia, India, even just getting away from the lies and deception of China. But there's a lot of these, and we've discussed this many times on the show. A lot of money that comes in from businessmen that are connected to the CCP, and that's not likely to change anytime soon.
You talked about the authority that was granted to the Maori or tribal groups, even the ones that organise crime gangs. But the race card in Australia is starting to. Well, a lot more are being expired. Let's just put it that way.
Expired.
Because there were two Indigenous NRL players, Latrell Mitchell and Josh Addo-Carr. They went on a camping trip with their other members of their mob, their brothers, as they put it, clearly breaking social restrictions. They got fined $1,000 each by the New South Wales government. The NRL fined them $50,000, and everyone called bullshit on that it was a Aboriginal cultural trip, because they've also been charged with firearms offences as well, and had their firearms license suspended. I don't. In ancient Aboriginal culture, I don't think there were firearms and motorcycles.
And you mentioned the iwi here in New Zealand, the iwi checkpoints, or the community checkpoints as they're called. On one hand, nobody really blames them for wanting to look after their own, because they don't trust the government. But on the other hand, of course, the law should apply equally to everyone, and we can see that there's a little bit of favoritism that's been going on. I don't know if I mentioned, did we get to the third indiscretion from our health minister.
Oh, is there another one? Oh, what's he
There's
done
another one.
now?
Is he moved house during the level 4 lockdown.
Was that not allowed?
Sort of. If you were in the process of moving house, I believe it was considered okay to finish it, to complete moving house, as long as you didn't break your bubble. But several people say they were told off, actually had been reprimanded for continuing to move house or for moving house. So there was a little bit of uncertainty around that. And if you are the health, the health minister, then you'd be expected to be well above board. But in this case, it was sort of let slip because it only came out either the day before or the day of, or even the day after the level 4 lockdown had been lifted. So it was kind of not relevant news anymore. So he did, again, cases of people in positions of power or, leveraging their interests, leveraging their special interests, or just, knowing that the enforcement mechanisms weren't really there, taking advantage of that.
So he's basically the unhealthy minister.
Yeah, exactly.
Both in a political and
but he's still got his job.
Yes, we've only had one casualty in. Oh no, we've had a Queensland shadow LNP minister, shadow police minister. He resigned because he had a driveway drinks with a few other people. But it's easier to demote somebody in opposition than during.
It's it's I'm sure, and we've got a super chat here. I'll let you take it.
Oh yes,
before we move on.
Diana Marsden. Well, I live in Vic, but I'm not going to download the COVID Safe app. Do they have any tracking back at home? Oh well, you already answered that.
That's the only. I did answer that earlier. They don't, but they've said they're working on one. We haven't heard what it is yet. But yeah, it'll be a similar thing. They may just buy the Australian one. You never know how they'll do it. So it'd be difficult to check it. And yeah, that's just checking some more. If you've got another super chat, send it through. We've got less than 10 minutes left in the show. We will be finishing on time tonight. So
yes, because we've got another show that is on at 7 p.m. Melbourne time Friday nights. Logan Spalding's What's He On About Now? So that'll be on in approximately 10 minutes time. So we've got the added I would say incentive not to ramble on too long.
Exactly.
But I'll move.
So we've got a few. Yeah, we do have a few items left, so you can move on to the next one.
Yeah, you mentioned that you had doubts about whether New Zealand will hold its general election in September. Even during the height of the pandemic, Queensland still had their in-person polling booth attendance, local government elections in Queensland. They were held, and the results were counted and declared. Now we're going to have a federal by-election with the Labor member for Eden Monaro, Mike Kelly, resigning for legitimate health reasons. He is widely respected across the aisle. He's ex-ADF personnel, and he was a popular local member. He was originally elected in 2007 with the Rudd slide, lost his seat during the Rudd bath of 2013, but won it back in 2016 because the Liberal local member Peter Hendy, he was involved in the coup against Tony Abbott, so that damaged him, and was obviously re-elected Mike Kelly in 2019, and it's historically been a bellwether seat until Mike Kelly, who's been able to buck the trend at a couple of elections now. But the two New South Wales state MPs, John Barilaro, he's the member for Monaro, he's the Deputy New South Wales Premier from the National Party, and Andrew Constance, the member for Bega, who was basically the face of the New South Wales bushfires because his electorate was completely decimated by the bushfires.
Down.
Well, Yeah,
Yeah,
he had to.
definitely. Lots of
He had
damage.
yeah, he had to defend his own property, and there was one time where he was actually unaccounted for. And John Barilaro, as the deputy premier international, has been quite outspoken on energy policy, on freeing up the Murray-Darling basin, and so it looks like it could be a three-cornered contest between Labor, Liberals, and the Nationals. And well, it's obviously a party in government has never won a by-election from the opposition for I think about 75 years, because the Super Saturday by-elections were no exception to that. The Liberals got a bit cocky and thought they would win some of those. They didn't. But if even though the Nationals have never held the seat, there's already, and this is how sort of I think some political junkies are sort of hoping things go back to normal, that John Barilaro, if he wins that seat and as a federal national MP, he could challenge Michael McCormack for the Nationals leadership and become deputy prime minister like that. And Barnaby Joyce, of course, would help make that happen.
I'm sure. We've got two last little bits of New Zealand news that I might as well get through, having to do with loans and debts and some of the economic fallout we've had. The New Zealand banks are going back to zero interest, sorry, not zero interest, but 0% deposit loans. So you used to have a 20% deposit requirement to get a home loan, especially, and that has now been reduced to zero. So the basically what caused the great financial crisis of 2008 was deemed to be the people over leveraging in their houses. That's now suddenly a feature and being allowed or being encouraged, because they're worried about people not being able to make their home loan payments or having to top up their mortgages and not and then having mortgagee sales, and then bringing down the entire housing market and the economy. So they're setting up for some bad times there. And the in sort of a classic example of government incompetence, the New Zealand government yesterday accidentally passed the wrong legislation under urgency, because they are passing law incredibly quickly, because everything is now under urgency. New Zealand is known as being one of the the parliament is being known as basically being the fastest in the world to pass legislation, because we have a very simple system. So they ran through they tabled some legislation and ran through it in a couple of hours, and then afterwards they realized it was actually had a bunch of extra bits added into it that would allow the IRD to make loans to businesses worth up to several $billion, I think up to $3 or so. It was a $2.5 billion. So within the space of about 3 or 4 hours, they passed some legislation that may cost $2.5 billion in loans, of course. But again, these are loans, so businesses likely to have to pay them back. But there could be some, there could be some loopholes in there, because that's how competent your government is in the middle of a crisis.
That's even worse than, it's actually way worse than when the coalition accidentally voted for Pauline Hanson's "It's okay to be white" motion on an administrative error. We will finish on some good news, and it's news that probably a lot of people have forgotten. The White Island volcano eruption in December last year. A lot of the survivors are now being discharged from hospital and telling their stories. They look like they're going to make full recoveries, which is great, and we should not forget. Basically, the heroes of that tragedy as well. The
locals who went in, hopped on their boats and went out there, fished as many people out of the water as they could. A couple of people made a few trips. Helicopter pilot, stayed in the air for a very long time. And I see some of the survivors at least are suing the
cruise ship.
The cruise ships, that's it. So it was on the tip of my tongue. Cruise ships, bad year for cruise ships, absolutely.
Yeah.
And maybe we talked last week or the week before about how it may be the end of cruise ships, although I would never count them out, because people will go back to normal. We're talking about the new normal, but eventually if you let them, which hopefully we will. You never know if the government will let people go back to normal, they'll go back to normal. But the cruise ship's just not having a good time.
We didn't learn anything from the Titanic in 1911. That should have
No,
warned people forever about cruise ships.
Yeah, no, that's not the case. So good news for the survivors of White Island. Good news in terms of coronavirus cases throughout Australia and New Zealand basically being down to nothing. But there's some economic bad news ahead, and so that will be covered in the coming weeks and months. And with all of that, we will have to wrap up the show. We're just coming up to 9
just
p.m.
one final super chat here. Follow up from
Excellent.
Diana Marsden. Thanks again for the Australian $5 super chat. Good stuff. I missed a little of the show. We'll follow more intently. Have a good weekend. Thank you for tuning in and your contributions as well. And I'll be back on Monday night for Wilms Front, 7 p.m. Melbourne time on the Tim Wilms YouTube and D-Live channel. My guest will be Noah Revy, co-host of James Fox Higgins, the Patriarch Hour show.
Good stuff, Tim. And I am not doing any other shows, not doing very much writing at the moment. Very much busy with life and family and politics. So I'm enjoying that. If I do write anything, it's up on rightminds.nz or it'll be on the bfd.org.nz. And thank you to everyone for coming to watch the show. We've had a good evening, and we'd like to see you back here next week. And that's it for us tonight.
Yep. And we'll see you next Friday, and I'll let you know. Well, we'll know if Australians are 2/3 free. Let's put it that way.
Good night.
Good night.